Okay, Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Welcome back to the Wars of Kings. We've been working on this here for what? Is this our second week? First, maybe it's our third week. Second or third week. I don't know if we'll get done today, but I think we'll certainly make some progress this week. And again, I hope it really helps you discern the times that we're in, because we don't know for certain that this is the last generation, but that's the obligation of every generation, which is to prepare as if it's the last generation. So we have to prepare two ways. We have to prepare young people to be the next generation, or we have to prepare to be the last generation. And that preparation shouldn't be so much different. It really shouldn't. We should be prepared either way. All right, so we'll get started here. And share my screen with you. And what I'd like to do is back up a little bit just to remind you, it has been a week probably since you looked at the list. So let's go back here and look at the comparison between. Just at a glance, and then this is what we're doing now. We've looked at the list, the comparison list, and now we're going back through them one by one and saying, hey, where else do we see this? Do we see this in the book of Revelation? And beyond the book of Revelation, do we see this in our own generation? That would be two important things to connect with. Number one, the what I would call the Revelation Haggadah, the Revelation plagues, and John's description of those plagues. And of course, we want to connect them with our own time period, because if we don't know who the enemy is, if we don't know the siege tactics of the enemy, then we might just fall right into it. You know, we might not really see the enemy coming, because maybe we're looking for something a little more apocalyptic that we can read in one sitting, like the book of Revelation, instead of looking at how these particular plagues might occur over the course of time, maybe so slowly that we don't automatically link them together at the beginning, right? So in the comparison, remember the war tactics of the kings correspond to the 10 plagues. So the plague of blood corresponded to what is usually a preliminary tactic, which is to attack the sources of the city's fresh water, to attack water supplies. The plague of frogs, we saw, was connected to another tactic in which the besieging force will use sound to frighten and to confuse. And remember, that's what's underlying all of this. In the Wars of Kings, there is an insect, a supernatural insect, sometimes translated as a hornet, a locust. It's called the tzila in the Torah. The Torah calls it the tzila. And it works two ways. Remember, it shoots its venom to blind you, to confuse you, to frighten you, to torment you. That preliminary step is not to kill you. It's purely torment and confusion. And then the second step is that it will go in and it will cut off the root and the fruit. And when it cuts off the root and the fruit, when it cuts off the next generation, when it cuts off your ability to bear good fruit, in that process, it could also take your life, right? We would see that also as, you know, in terms of when the Tzira went before the Israelites to destroy the Canaanite kings, of course, it did bring about their death. But sound is one of the tactics, words. It might even be music, and not so long ago, if we watch movies about the Revolutionary War, or maybe the War of 1812, or maybe some of the European wars, we saw that they had musicians that went before the army. And not only did that encourage the army, but it was also able to throw fear into the enemy. Because if you hear the sound of those drums beating, today that's still an expression, that's still a euphemism, where, when you hear the drums beating, that's saying that, hey, there's conflict on the horizon. And so we don't always see the enemy before we hear the enemy, but it might come at the same time. So it might be through sound, it might be through music, it might be through taunting. We see all of this as tactics in Scripture. Next, what is described as lice or gnats. This corresponds to the light ranged missiles. This is not a face-to-face combat. This, you may not even know where it comes from. It just may appear out of the air. And this is when the archers would launch arrows into the city. And so there's no real aiming there. It just seems like it's falling randomly. But what does this do? It's something that gets under your skin. And again, it continues the work of the tzira. It causes anxiety. Of course, it stings too. Make no doubt about it. An arrow can kill you. All right. It's not that it won't kill you. It's just that at this stage of the game, it'll seem more random. Because it happens at such a distance. That's why we call it a ranged missile. Next would be the pestilence. And no, excuse me, I skipped the wild beasts. We're going to start with the wild beasts today. And the wild beasts would be a mixture of wild beasts. It wouldn't be one particular kind. It would be a mixture of them. Sometimes it's called swarms of flies. Depends on your translation. The entire biblical context seems to be pointing us to a mixture of wild beasts, because even Paul is going to talk about how he fought wild beasts at Ephesus, and it kind of fits what we know about the mixture of beasts. Next is, and of course, that's going to correspond to the foreign mercenaries. That's where we're getting the idea here of mixture. There's foreign elements mixed in with this. And these are people who are paid to play, right? They are for sale. Number 5 is going to be the pestilence. And this is the tactic of trying to seize captives. You try to catch people away from a place of safety. You prey upon the weak. And like we said the last couple of weeks, notice how these plagues, they're not separate from one another. They build upon one another. There's elements of one plague that you'll see in the other plague. So if we look at the plague of wild beasts are predators. Okay? So with the pestilence, there is an element of captivity. It's not just disease. Disease does hold you captive, and we just came through something with that. How a disease can hold you captive, it can bind you up, it can limit your movement. And so the seizing of captives, kind of locking people in place where they can't be useful, where they can't move. Again, it instills fear, and there's a predatory aspect to it. Number 6 is the boils, and that's going to be related to the next stage of a siege, which is to try to burn the city. You try to lob things that will set things on fire. Burning is, again, full of terror. Each of these steps is going to have some element of what the hell bug does. It doesn't only cause you confusion, it causes you anxiety and torment before it kills you. It wants to torment you first. And then in the end, you might be killed. But its primary job at first is not to kill. It's to simply cause you anxiety and torment. And of course, the boils, we're going to look at some specific scripture that links boils to burning. 7 is the hail, the plague of hail. And this will fall into the category of heavy bombardment. Again, it's going to be ranged weapons. It's almost face-to-face combat, but they're still considered ranged weapons, right? This might be the artillery. This might be dropping missiles out of airplanes and things like that, if you were to compare it to something in the military world. Right? But it's not going to be something you can face. It's just going to fall on you. And again, there's the element of torment and terror, because it's hard to dodge it. You might take refuge. That's going to be your response at this point, is try to find a safe place of refuge. Number 8 is the locusts, and the locusts are an army. They're a large army. And this is finally, you are facing the real enemy face to face. And so these are the melee units. This is the infantry. This is the book. These are the foot soldiers of the army, and you will look them in the eyeballs. You will know who's after you at this point. And they will just overrun things and destroy everything. Anything that's left, they'll destroy. Number 9 is going to be darkness, which will be another element of imprisonment, not as random as seizing captives. This, you'll put the whole city in a state of darkness. You'll put a whole people into a state of darkness, which is going to be directly connected to not just anxiety, but the worst forms of anxiety. We would probably call it clinical depression, deep depression, hopelessness, hopelessness to the extent that if somebody could do harm to themselves, they would. But this is, remember, the tactic of the Tzira. At the preliminary steps of his attack, he won't let you die. We'll read that in Revelation. He will not let you die. You must suffer the torment. And that deep depression, that freezing, that inability to move from your place is basically the win. That's the win. At this point, what is left, if there's any chance of, say, countermeasures, it'll be followed by the execution of the city's leaders, which corresponds, of course, to the death of the firstborn. All right, just a little bit of review for anybody that might have missed last week. All right, so let's skip ahead. Not really ahead. Let's just catch up to ourselves. Let's get into the plague of wild beasts, which is plague number 4. Plague number 4. And remember, this corresponds to an attack by foreign mercenaries. These are people who were paid to play. These are hunters, and they're for sale. They're unrooted. They're very unstable. They're described in quite a bit of detail. As you get toward the end of the apostolic scriptures, as you're kind of winding down the letters of the apostles, and you're getting ready to move into the book of Revelation, you will read about these people. They're called clouds without water. They're unrooted. They're unstable. They are the hidden reefs at your love feast. In other words, they just pop out on you. But Scripture is trying to warn us that they're there, and they've been there the whole time. They've been walking among us the whole time. But at this stage, at this plague, number 4, they will form into mobs, and they will attack. Again, they're predatory. They prey on the weak, and they're specifically looking for people who might cut in on their income. And there's all sorts of income that we could make. You might measure your income in money. Some people aren't that interested in money. If you look at maybe politicians, a lot of them, yeah, they might be looking for ways to make money on the side. We've seen that recently. But just as often, when you look at people in places of power, whether it's politics, it could be any other system of the beast. And notice in our picture here is a picture of a leopard, because the leopard represented the Greek kingdom. And the kingdom of the beast, the stage of the beast kingdom of Greece was the leopard, and it was characterized by its spots. And as we went into a Hebrew study, we saw that the spots represented systems, organizations. And how does the leopard prey upon you? Through his organizations. And at first, he will try to entice you. Second, he will try to intimidate you or coerce you. And then third, if you don't come into the system and do what he says, then he will try to destroy you. Right? So it's a gradual process with Greece. And what happened was the next beast, which is Rome, which was a composite beast of the beast that went before, the lion, the bear, and the leopard. He took all these systems of Greece and began to perfect them, like sports, athletics. First, you're enticed, then you're coerced, and eventually it can destroy you. And it can bring decay to a nation. If you look at the Colosseum of Rome, it brought decay to a nation because winning at all costs began to destroy the soul of Rome. Other systems, it could be medical systems. Any system that's out there can be used. It can be the educational system. First, you're enticed, then you're coerced, and then you're destroyed. Right? And do you see mobs in these systems, dealing with these systems somehow? Sometimes they appear to be organized, but at this stage, often it's very quick. They assemble very quickly. All right, it's like you didn't know there was a system there, but all of a sudden it assembles. It's like a flash mob. What happens in a lot of college towns, if they win an athletic championship, they start overturning cars and setting things on fire. I mean, my goodness, they start shooting guns. It's just, really? Is that how you wanted to celebrate? You might see that in politics. You might see mobs. You might see it in the economic system. You might see mobs pop up and they begin to raid stores and loot and so forth, just destroying things. Sometimes it's not even about what they can steal with the mob. It's what they can destroy, what they can overturn. And these mobs, the swiftness with which they can assemble today even exceeds Paul's day when they assembled really fast. Remember, he's in the city of Ephesus and he starts preaching the gospel. And the craftsmen's guild, there again, that's an organization. There was already an organization in place. It was a craftsmen's guild. And they realize he's cutting in on their business because now he's preaching Yeshua and they don't need their little silver Diana idols anymore. Are they upset because they're that religious? Absolutely not. He's just cut in on their economy. He's cut in on their wealth. And so that organization that's already present very quickly pulls in this level of plague, which is wild beasts. There are going to be people always wandering around out there till Yeshua comes who are for sale. You just shout out the topic of the day. You shout out what you perceive the atrocity of the day is, and they will join you and just jump in it with you to feed. Right? They smell blood. And they live in the fervor of the moment. So nowadays, with things like well, I'm not even going to name the apps because there's too many of them now, but they can go on an app with like-minded people, that is, wild beasts, unrooted, unstable, living in the fervor of the moment, predatory, and in a moment they can find some place to go and destroy. That's what's meant by a mixture of the beast. As we're trying to take, a little swarm of animals, wild animals, a mixture of wild animals, how do we say, well, how is that happening today? Well, that's exactly what's happening today. Nothing's really changed. Paul gave us the clue when he got attacked by the wild beasts at Ephesus, and he calls them out. He says they were wild beasts. And they might even attack you for calling them beasts instead of human beings when they're not acting at all like human beings. They're acting like beasts. But they are for sale. They shop around for things to be offended by. They shop around for things to be upset about. And it's not as if they personally have this conviction. They don't. You could have talked to them 10 minutes ago and they wouldn't have given, 2 cents for that particular offense. But if there's going to be something exciting happen, if we're going to go beat somebody up, if we're going to go loot a store, if we're going to go set something on fire, if we're going to go tear something up, if we're going to go instill fear into motorists, then by all means, let's go do it. And we're for that. Now, what did you say I'm for? Maybe you need to give me a t-shirt so I'll remember what I'm for in this moment. That's the mentality that we're talking about. And I don't know that we've ever seen it in history as severe as we see it today, because now almost, in real time, we can watch it happening. If we have television or even a phone where we can get live video feeds, we can watch these mobs in action. But remember, they are not really sold out to the cause. They might be controlled by those who are really sold out, who are part of the organizations of the beast that we're talking about. So they're only on the periphery in that sense. Just like in ancient times, let's say Babylon, they want to attack a particular city-state. Do they send their best troops in first? No, they hire mercenaries to go in first and soften them up, to instill the fear in them. You hold your best troops for the last. You want to preserve them. But in that sense, yes, the mercenaries are part of the organization, but they're not truly the invested ones, because they'll sell themselves to tomorrow's cause as well. Right. And so when you look at the headlines, it'll change. They'll have riots for this cause this week, but then they'll have riots for that cause next week. Are they the same people? Sometimes, but they all have the same mentality. Now, as we're looking at a mixture of beasts, Rashi points out, or he I guess you would say he puts the spotlight on 2 particular kinds of beasts out of this mixture of wild beasts. And he says that the plague of mixed wild beasts on Egypt included the scorpions and the serpents. And he says all sorts of harmful beasts and snakes and scorpions. He says in a disordered assortment, following the tactics of the wars of kings. In other words, he's pointing us back to our paradigm we're working from here with the wars of kings. And even though there's an order of tactics, they appear to you in a very disorderly manner. And that's the thing that you can remember about the wild beasts. It's a state of disorder, a state of disorder. And out of the disordered assortment of beasts, snakes and scorpions can be particularly harmful. Now, we're going back to the wilderness because we're talking about Exodus. We're talking about what is the template that we've been given to work from. If you remember, when the Israelites went into the wilderness and the clouds of glory, remember, they're protected by the clouds in the wilderness, because that's what Paul tells us. They were all under the cloud. as long as they stayed under the cloud, in other words, they were cooperative, they were obedient, they did what the Holy One said through Moses, then that cloud specifically protected them from the wild beasts of the wilderness, particularly scorpions and serpents. If they remembered their king, then they were protected. The wild beasts had no control over them. But when they forgot his commandments, then the serpents were loosed upon them. And that's, you say, well, how do we prepare for this today? Well, if you obey his commandments, you still might find yourself attacked by wild beasts. What's the difference? How does a beast harm you? Hurt your feelings? Okay. Yeah, that's harm. It's sticks and stones can break my bones, but words will never hurt me. That's not quite true. Words do hurt. But can they kill you? Can they cause an incurable wound? If you are following the commandments, no, they cannot. It's just a plague. It's uncomfortable. It can make you sad, of course, when people attack you. It can make you feel down when people attack you. But can they kill you? Can they take away from you what the King of Kings has given to you, your inheritance? No, they can't. And so there will be a season of testing. There will be seasons where the same plagues that are out there in the earth, that we're also experiencing them, but we're experiencing them differently. We're experiencing them as tests. Will you remember your king? If so, whatever they do to you, it might make you feel bad, but it's like with Job, you can't take his life. You can take maybe his goods. You know, if his children, there's some evidence there that possibly he had some rascally children, because remember, he was making sacrifices on their behalf. They weren't even doing it. And then they were partying hardy when they were actually killed. Could he take somebody out of your life? He could. Let's hope he doesn't. But if there are people out there who have forgotten their king, then scorpions and serpents can go in and do some real damage there. But in this case, like with Paul, the wild beasts couldn't kill him. They couldn't kill who he was. And at the very worst, all the wild beasts could ever do is take your body, but they can't take your soul. And that's what we're warned. Don't worry about the things they're able to kill the body. Worry about something that's able to kill your soul. That's the important thing, because just because this body dies doesn't mean anything except life is started for the righteous, that is. But the intention here is just to remind us, hey, keep walking with your king. He's going to clear out these serpents and scorpions. They don't have access to your soul, right? They can't kill your soul. They can make your soul very uncomfortable. But you keep walking in his word, and it strips the power out of them. And remember, Yeshua was taken into the wilderness to be tempted. Why the wilderness? Because it's related to this plague of wild beasts. There's a predatory nature to the wilderness, and we are in the wilderness of the peoples, by the way. So there will be times when we are preyed upon. Yeshua was preyed upon in the wilderness to be tested, not to kill him, to be tested, to see if he would answer, "It is written," instead of "I think, I feel, I want." And a lot of times, yeah, those beasts do get some bites in on us until we learn to say, "It is written," instead of "I think, I feel, I want." Because if the beast perceives that you're big on feelings, then he will attack your feelings. If he finds out you're big on thoughts, he will attack your thoughts. If the beast notices you have a lot of sensuality, a lot of desire, you like that excitement, then that's exactly where he's going to attack. Until you start to answer him based on it is written, not I desire, not my appetite. And that's what the word does throughout our lifetime. It makes us more and more and more spiritually agile as we answer. It is written, it is written, it is written. And it might start out, I don't care what I feel, it is written. I don't care what I think, it is written. I don't care what I want, it is written. That's a hard one to say sometimes because we think we feel that we want different things sometimes than the King wants for us. When we listen to that, then we forget him. And when we forget him, he says, okay, let me take a little bit of this protection away from you so you'll remember what my word says. Now, this brings us back to the tzira. This brings us back to the hell bug that is released out of Abaddon. He was used by Moses on behalf of Moses in destroying Canaanite kings. He was also used in the time of Joshua to destroy Canaanite kings. So Moses, Joshua, we have a record of it being used twice before. John, and there might be more. Those are the only two I'm aware of. Before John begins to try to describe them, which he has a hard time doing because they're not of this world. They're a supernatural creature. If you want a good review on the attributes of that creature, like I'm saying, how do you know how this bug works? Well, scripture tells us how the bug works. And so if you were wanting to research that, then you can go back in the YouTube videos to 2018. And the title of there's a two-part program, I believe, part 1 and part 2. It's in the Torah portion, Re'eh, and the title is Destroy, You Shall Destroy. Destroy, you shall destroy. So if you can dig back in the archives there and find that, you'll get basically the Moby Dick of the hell bug. So that when I keep saying, well, his job is to shoot venom, his job is to blind you, confuse you, torment you, cut off root and fruit, you'll have a really good context for that. I don't really want to reteach it. But that's the way that the tzira operates. And because he's not of this world, he can be described in various ways: a hornet, a locust, a horse, or horse-like, scorpion. It'll have like a serpent's aspect to it as well, is one of the ways John describes it. He will also have the features of a man. He will have the face of a man, but it'll describe his hair like that of a woman. And so, like I said, he's got two basic steps. He shoots venom at the foes of Israel. This causes blindness, confusion, torment, anxiety. And then his second step, once you have been tortured, his second step, he cuts off the root and the fruit, right? He'll take you into total blindness, total confusion, total anxiety, total helplessness, total, what would you say? Just throw your hands up. You won't know what to do. And then, of course, he separates out the generations. He inhibits your ability to produce good fruit, not bad fruit, but your ability to produce the good fruit. And there you can see a real generation gap here when you start looking at how he works in a practical realm. Right? As we go beyond what scripture describes, you say, well, how would that look in a generation? when you start to see we started hearing about the generation gap, I think back in the 60s. It's even worse today. There is an even worse generation. It just keeps getting wider and wider and wider, because now the disengaged generations are having babies, and then that disengaged generation is having babies, and then that disengaged generation is having babies. And the second generation, it's getting increasingly more difficult to preserve that respect and that link between the two generations, because we see less and less generations willing to lay down their lives for their children. They're more interested in self-promotion, self-fulfillment, self-esteem. The dominant things in our culture today start with self. Well, that's exactly how you cut off the root and the fruit. If you want your children disengaged and worse than you are, that's what you do. You keep working on yourself. So let's look at the wild beasts. It's Strong's 6160, which is a rav. A rav is derived from Strong's 6150, which is also a rav, and it lends there the sense of sterility. Sterility. That should sound really familiar right now, guys. Not only does it separate the generations out, it causes the generations to become less productive. And right now in our culture, there is definitely a mob mentality. We've definitely got wild beasts out there. And in the work of the wild beasts, again, which they're for sale, you know, whether they're 100% convinced of the doctrines that they promote, probably if you looked in their heart of hearts, they don't really care. They're just for disruption. They're just for predation, cutting off the root and the fruit. And we have fallen to such an extent that now it's as though, even though the earth is definitely overpopulated, that mentality is not going to last much longer. And what we would say are the more civilized countries, well, they're not that civilized. They're actually wild beasts. Because what are they doing? They're not reproducing. And when they do reproduce, they're making their children twice the sons of hell that they are, because they refuse to teach them morality. They refuse to teach them the ethics that have stood since the creation, which can only be found in the word of Adonai. That's the only place you find your ethics. It's the only place you find your morality. It's the only place that is going to endure. It is written. It's a foundation for every generation. It does not change from generation to generation. But instead you hear stupid things like, well, I'm going to wait till my child gets grown and then they can decide for themselves what religion they want to be. They can decide how spiritual they want to be. Well, I'm spiritual, but you know, I don't exactly live by the Bible. And more, any catalog you pick up, there's a little Buddha in the background. I'm like, when did this start? Probably, again, there was a lot of shaking going on in the 60s. Now the fruit we're getting is taking us towards sterility. Marriage of a man and a woman, which produces fruit. Now that's under direct attack. There's no question. It's under direct attack in this generation in a way that it never has been in previous generations. Deuteronomy 32:17 mentions that there'll come a time when you serve gods your fathers did not know. In other words, as immoral as our ancestors might have been in previous generations, This generation of mercenaries is going to be characterized by promoting immoralities even they would not have thought of. What did he say? Sodom would have repented in sackcloth and ashes if they had heard this word. Right? This word, this generation has more word than any other. And yet they are departing in the most unthinkable ways that previous generations have not even thought of. I mean, we have kids who, I don't think they literally think they're cats or kangaroos or whatever it is they say they're identifying as nowadays. I think this is stuff just planted in order to produce sterility of the soul, where you've got human beings who can produce absolutely nothing but chaos. That's all they can produce. They can't produce the good works of the scripture. They can't produce the fruit of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, goodness, meekness, gentleness. You don't see that much anymore. And it's up to the people of faith, it's up to the righteous to continue and be established in the fruit of the Spirit so that the world has a point of comparison. And when they get sick of these unthinkable levels of immorality, they will see that light. They will see that menorah on a hill. And they will know where to go and say, how do I repent? I don't even understand. They don't even understand right and wrong at this point. Because right is whatever the mob says it is. Right is whatever the wild beast says it is. They don't know there is a wrong and a right. They don't know it is written. And if we don't tell them, who will? If we're not available to them, who will be? Because even our fathers did not descend to these levels of immorality. It says it again in Daniel 11:38. And Paul, as he's teaching us about what happened to him in Ephesus, he's writing to the Corinthians in 1 Corinthians 15:32, and he's telling them about this incident at Ephesus. And he links it again with this sterility of the soul. He says, if from human motives I fought with wild beasts at Ephesus, what does it profit me? If it's a human motive, it's nothing more than the beast itself. It's a beast fighting a beast. But he says, if the dead are not raised, let us eat and drink, for tomorrow we die. That's the mentality of the beast. And Paul is saying, Yeshua resurrected from the dead. Yeshua resurrected so we could resurrect from the dead. There is a tomorrow. We don't have to eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die and there's nothing else. That is a sterility of the soul. That is a sterility of thought process. That is a sterility of appetite. That is a sterility of emotion. You don't produce fruit from that. You produce gluttony. You produce drunkenness. You produce drug addiction. You produce theft. You produce robbery. You produce murder. You produce adultery. You produce rape. You produce fornication. Why is there more fornication in this generation than any other? They don't even have the respect of a marriage agreement like people from ancient times. Because the mentality is, let us eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. Let's do everything we can possibly do, because there's no accountability for tomorrow. And Paul is saying we're different from that. We know the dead are raised, and we know there is a tomorrow. There is a reason to maintain a fruitfulness of the Spirit. Because when we don't live with that fruitfulness of the Spirit, based on it is written, not I think, I feel, I want, what are we doing? We're the contrast. We are fighting with wild beasts. What does the gospel do? It cuts in on their systems. It cuts in on their organizations. because all those organizations, as they have continued to evolve over time, they're really at this point prefaced with, let us eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. And it takes some really weird turns too. Like the climate change question. Is climate changing? Yes, because of sin. You want to stop climate change? You quit sinning. Sin makes heat. We're going to see that in the plague of boils. Sin makes heat. Sin scorches you. Sin will kill you. Of course, there's climate change because we are more sinful than we have ever been in history. People don't think there's any profit to righteous living. So they eat, drink, and be merry for tomorrow. They think it's just a matter of death, that there's no accountability. There is. There is no reason to live a predatory life. And when you stand for the word, you cut in on sports as God. You cut in on politics, the corruption. When you stand on the word, you stand against the garbage they're trying to teach children in school. And you can go through every one of those systems. When you stand for the word, you can say military, that's a road too far. That's not the way you raise up an army. There are standards for an army in the scripture. Why would we pick different ones? We cut in on their economy. We cut in on the economy of let us eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. What is the climate change philosophy, the climate change religion? What does it lead to? They really just want to kill most of the people except for themselves. That's all I can see. They want to restore the earth and no people. When actually we were created to rule over this earth. Have we done a horrible job? Yes. How do we correct it? Obey. Keep the commandments, keep the statutes, keep the ordinances. And so eventually this economy that helps drive so many of these organizations and systems of the beast, it's going to be destroyed by the plagues. The rise of the economy that has fostered so much of this immorality, it could only occur in a strong economy. It could only occur in an economy of leisure where people have the free time to go hunt down the worst kind of immoralities and to practice the worst kind of immoralities. Back in the 30s, life was hard. Just finding 2 or 3 meals a day took all day for most people. They didn't have the free time to philosophize. Too much free time. Electronics. It's given us all the time in the world to find out exactly how reprobate we are. But if we stay busy, if we serve Adonai, then we don't lend so much free time to self-discovery. And instead, we lend it to his service. We lend it to feeding the orphans. We lend it to protecting widows. We invest it in those who need our help instead of preying upon them and using them simply as tools for whatever system we adhere to, as a mercenary, as a wild beast. Is there hope? Oh, you bet there's hope. You know there's hope. That's why we're here. because Yeshua is the hope. He's the Mikveh Yisrael. And if we go back to Acts 10, verses 9 through 15, remember, this is Peter's vision. And Peter was told to rise, kill, and eat. Peter sees the mixed bag of wild beasts, and he says, oh, no, Lord. There's nothing in there I would eat. I've never touched anything unclean. Well, let's see exactly what he was being asked to do. Within a swarm of wild beasts, a bag of wild beasts, there would have also been clean animals who got caught up. And that's exactly what he's shown about his vision, is that these non-Jews, these believers from the nation, they were clean. And they weren't unclean simply by the fact that they were touching unclean things, that they were all out there in the same bag. They'd all been tossed into the same bag, good, bad, ugly. But out in those nations, there were going to be Gentiles. There were going to be non-Jews who wanted to come to the covenant. They're clean. And so just because there might have been a snake wound around their ankle, it didn't mean they were a snake. It meant that they had been touching them. And remember, part of that was in Jewish law at that time, a Jew didn't even go into a Gentile's home to eat, just to be sure that they're not going to be eating an unclean thing. And so this is used as an object lesson. He's saying, hey, look, I want you to go talk to Cornelius. I know you see him as being in this mixed bag of wild animals, but I want you to take him out. I want you to lead him to the house of the Father. I want you to make a separation with him. Don't call him unclean just because he's touching unclean things. He's a Roman. I'm going to bring him out, and you're going to be part of that. And we're part of that too. We're like Peter. We can't just look out there and condemn everything we see on the news. In that mixed bag of wild beasts out there that we're looking at on the news every day, that we're running into at the grocery store, there's some clean animals out there. There's some clean people. And are they running around with wild things? They are. And it might be that you're the Peter that's going to take Cornelius by the hand and teach them step by step what is written, what is their guideline now, because it is confusing if you're in a mixed bag of wild beasts. And remember, their religion changes every day. It just depends on where the mob's going today. They need you to help ground them, and it is written. And it's just like putting blinkers on a horse. You ever watch the horse races and you wonder why some of those horses had a hood on and little blinkers, and there's little things out to the side here. What does it do? It keeps them running straight ahead, because some horses, if they see a horse running over here, or they see that jockey moving his whip around, or they see a horse over here and that jockey moving his whip around, or they feel like something's coming up on them too fast, they'll start getting off the track. They'll start running and bumping into stuff. But some of them, if you'll put blinkers on them, they'll go straight ahead, and they'll run faster, because they're not wasting all their time going back and forth and being distracted by what's going on around them. The word acts on us like that. Do you feel like you're distracted a lot? It is written, it is written, it is written, it is written, it is written. I don't care what I think, I feel, I want. It is written, it is written. If you will discipline yourself over time, you won't do it in a day, you won't do it in a week, you won't do it in a year. But over the course of your life, if you will resort to it is written, when you're confused and anxious about I think, I feel, I want, and I think, I feel, I want is not lining up with the dead will raise, which is what Paul is telling them in Corinth. The dead are raised. So we should never be subject to let us eat, drink, and be merry. Let us think. Let us feel. You're not subject to those things. What guides your life is, it is written. And you know what? There's going to be a lot of unclean things out there on either side of you, and it's going to be really easy to get distracted by it. Quit sharing so many videos on your phone, Facebook. Quit looking for self-fulfilling prophecies. When you say, you mark my words, that's going to turn out this way. Quit looking to find ways to reinforce your dire predictions. You won't have to look long. It's kind of like fishing out of a barrel. You're bound to find something. There's no doubt about it. The wild beasts are out there. They're everywhere. You can confirm every suspicion that there's conspiracies, that these organizations are corrupt, that they're thieves, that they're robbers, that they're fornicators, that they're every unclean thing, and they practice every unclean thing. You can affirm that. Quit fixating on that and start fixating on it is written, because out there in that bag, there's a few clean ones. And those are the ones you're going to have to minister to. Okay, so the next one, I kind of got off on a tangent there, didn't I? Sorry. This, we got a lot more to say about wild beasts, but just remember the Arava goes back to Arov, which is the wild beasts. The Arava is a wilderness. And if you're out here in the wilderness of the peoples, it will be a place where you're surrounded by wild beasts. You'll be tested by wild beasts, but you don't have to be a wild beast. You don't have to become a predator yourself, and you don't have to become prey. The Israelites didn't have to become prey as long as they obeyed. You pray and obey, and you will not become prey. So our next plague here is number 5, which is pestilence. And again, you can see how the pestilence, even though we typically think of it as a disease, and it is, and it's typically a disease on livestock. It's on livestock, it's on animals. So you can see that this will be a direct attack on the animal soul. That is something that we do have in common with an animal, is we also have a soul called a nephesh, which is appetite, emotion, desire, and intellect. But our spirit is different from them. They do have the breath of life, but they are not made in the image of Elohim, the way that we are. And so we are, in that sense, different. But the animal soul, because we were seduced by the most cunning beast of the field, which is the serpent. And we're still being deceived by the most cunning beast of the field, which is the serpent, because he will always appeal to your soul. See, that's what an animal is a soul. Appetite, emotion, desire, and intellect. And he knows that's part of who you are. And he knows how hard it is for it to be disciplined by the Spirit, because the Spirit, the Holy Spirit, operates based on it is written, not I feel, I think, I want. And so with pestilence, not only is it, we're talking about literal disease here, it's an attack on the animal soul, the part of it that still needs to be disciplined to the Spirit. In the wars of kings, what they would do is they would take captives. If they found somebody out wandering around, if they found a vulnerable person, they would take them captive. And what they did is they would just put them in custody, and the captive never really knew what was going to happen to him. In some cases, we find out they're let go. They're held temporarily, then they're let go. Sometimes they're treated very badly. Sometimes they're treated well. Sometimes those captives are deported, like they were deported to Babylon. They had some hardship, but then they kind of bounced back. Their custody was temporary, and then they, I don't want to say blended right into Babylon, but they were able to endure those 70 years of exile. But when the time came, they needed to remember who they were and come out of that captivity and come home. So being captive is not always a horrible thing. It can be. We're going to look at a scripture in Revelation that suggests that it might actually be a good thing. If we know who we belong to, then there might be a temporary captivity that we can say, well, this is not pleasant right now, but I know it's temporary and I know it's short. I just have to hold on. So some will be set free after testing. For some, it will not be a test. It will be a plague, and it will be slavery or death. And you can even, if you want to, seal off an entire city as a prison, but that would shade more over to plague number 9, which is darkness. It's a much stronger imprisonment than just a pestilence, being taken captive temporarily. So this disease on a beast, a modern generation example, of course, would be COVID. It might be an epidemic, because what does the epidemic do? It seals you up in your house. It separates you from other people. There is a disease element to it. And it is kind of random. You know, it's like this stage, we're not talking about the whole city being a prison, even though we might have had several days of that. It's, you don't know who the disease is going to hit, right? So how can I tell the difference? If I'm a righteous person and I get a disease, does that mean that I'm wicked? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Since sin entered the world, so did disease. And so if you were to die from a disease as a righteous person, again, that's just the beginning of your life. It's not the end. But again, that pestilence can hold you in custody. And how does that come about? Well, hopefully it's not coming through organized systems, but it can. Things can go awry. Can it be used on purpose? It can. There are all sorts of biological weapons out there that can be unleashed as a pestilence. And it can absolutely pin you up in one place so that you won't be exposed. Let's look at Revelation 18, 2-8, because we're going to make a connection here with Babylon. Babylon is very present in the book of Revelation. It's something that's been around for a long time. And Babylon, remember, is related to confusion. The Tower of Babel, it was a thing that drew all the nations together, but then it confused them all. And so here's what it says. He cried out with a mighty voice, saying, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She has become a dwelling place of demons and a prison of every unclean spirit and a prison of every unclean and hateful bird. For all the nations," see, there's our nations there for Babylon, "for all the nations have drunk of the wine of the passion of her immorality, and the kings of the earth have committed acts of immorality with her. And the merchants of the earth have become rich by the wealth of her sensuality." It's going to be important here, even if we don't get to it till next week. They have become rich by the wealth of her sensuality. Remember, the soul functions on I think, I feel, I want. It functions on sensuality, appetite, emotion, desire, and intellect. Our desires have made the rich of the earth rich. Why do the big online marketplaces, why are those men the most wealthy? Our desire made them wealthy. What about social media? Why are these the most wealthy men on earth? because we had an appetite for it and we desired it. It was our sensuality. We made them rich with our sensuality. So you can see how in Babylon you are and how important it is to understand how to come out of Babylon even as you are in Babylon. You say, how am I in Babylon? You're in the nations. And within those nations, you are also within the beast systems. You are within medical systems. You are within political systems. You are within governmental systems. You are within military systems. You are within educational systems. You are within philosophical systems. You're within athletic systems. Not everybody, but a lot of us, right? Go Hogs. How within it are you? Do you know how to come out of that economic system? Because it's human desire that has made the rich of the earth wealthy. Now, we may not always like that. We might resent them for being wealthy, but we have to admit what Revelation is saying right here is true. It's the sensuality of the earth that have made the rich rich. It doesn't mean it's right. It just means that's the way that it is. And so it's these things of our sensuality, what we have to guard against. How can we be in Babylon, but not be of it? How can we come out of this sin of Babylon? How can we separate ourselves from a dwelling place of demons and of unclean spirits, a prison of unclean spirits, a prison of every unclean and hateful bird? Can we look around and see unclean and hateful things? Sure, we see Paul's sheet. But are we? Or are we a clean animal? By comparison, we're not animals. But in the comparison, has Babylon become our dwelling place? Are we happy with our sensuality? Have we been seduced into the acts of immorality that go with it? Our sensuality creates our own prison. Our thoughts create our own prison. Our appetites create our own prison. That's the way the soul works. The soul creates its own prison. So what is our advice? I heard another voice from heaven saying, come out of her, my people. Why? Because remember, the pestilence falls typically on animals, the animal soul. How can we be human beings mixed up in a big bag with wild and unclean beasts and demons and unclean spirits? He says, come out of her, my people, so that you will not participate in her sins and receive of her plagues. The plagues are for sins. Her plagues are for sins. Now, might you be around for some of these plagues? You could. These are your tests. They're not to destroy you. These are your tests. And so he says, come out of her, my people, so that you will not participate in her sins and receive of her plagues. For her sins have piled up as high as heaven. How high was the Tower of Babel? Remember, their goal was to get as high as heaven. And it's not that high, by the way. They didn't have to build the tower that high for what they were doing. In fact, you wouldn't even no higher than the height a dove would fly. That's all the height it had to have in order to penetrate for their goals, to penetrate into heaven. And it says, and God has remembered her iniquities. What have they done? They have replaced their commandments. They have replaced God's commandments with their own. That was the goal. They want to experience the Garden of Eden without the commandments of the Garden of Eden. They want to pollute the Garden of Eden with their sins. And what has happened? She's building her tower with her sins. And they have piled up as high as heaven. But what's going to happen? Remember, in the wilderness, when we forget, that's when we get plagues. But you know what? It says God has remembered her iniquities. He remembers. He's not going to forget. And he's never going to let her penetrate into heaven. She can go as high as heaven. That cup of iniquity can get that full. But it will never overflow into heaven. It will never overflow into the pure places. It will never overflow into the Garden of Eden. He won't let it. It says God has remembered her iniquities. That means he's about to visit them on her. Pay her back, even as she is paid, and give back to her double according to her deeds. And the cup which she has mix twice as much for her, to the degree that she glorified herself and lived sensuously. I think, I feel, I want. To the same degree, give her torment and mourning. There's our tzira, there's our hill bug, there to torment you, cut off the root and fruit, and take you to a place of mourning. For she says in her heart, I sit as a queen, and I am not a widow, and will never see mourning. For this reason, in one day, her plagues will come, pestilence and mourning and famine, and she will be burned up with fire. For the Lord God who judges her is strong. Now that's serious, but there's a lot of context right here. Come out of her, my people. How do you come out of Babylon? Yet you're living out here among the nations who are piling up their sins as high as heaven. Don't sin. Just don't sin. Remember his commandments in the wilderness. Don't sin. And he will make a distinction. And here's what she's doing. Remember, in one day, the plagues will come. Pestilence. With pestilence comes mourning, because there's death. And then there comes famine. Why is there a famine? Well, you're destroying the economy, basically, when you do that. You're not only killing people and animals with disease, these things are part of the economic system. And so Adonai is using this tactic to separate his own from the unclean, just the same way he removed Israel from Egypt. So we're told in Revelation 2:10, do not fear what you are about to suffer. Behold, the devil is about to cast some of you into prison, so that you will be tested, and you will have tribulation for 10 days. Be faithful until death, and I will give you the crown of life. Remember the wild beast philosophy, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die? Well, right here we are told, you be faithful until death. You believe in a resurrection. You believe there will be life once you cross over. Once the physical body dies, you know there's still life. And then after that, you know there's a resurrection of the body. And he says, you be faithful unto death, and I will give you the crown of life. There will be a resurrection for you. But don't be afraid of what you're about to suffer. Remember, fear is for the people who are stung by the hell bugs. Anxiety is for people stung by the hell bugs. You belong to the Father. There is no reason for you to be tormented by a bug that is here to plague the wicked. For those who refuse to join the ranks of those who are clean. And when we say clean, we don't mean physically clean. We mean ritually fit to enter the temple, to enter the house of Adonai. You don't go into his house just any old way. You don't say, I'm saved, therefore I can do anything I want to do. I can wallow around in any kind of pigsty I want to of sin. You don't go into his house like that. No, you don't. No, you better don't. But if you're doing your best to learn the difference between clean and unclean, to learn the difference between what is fit to enter his presence and what is unfit to be in his presence. He says, don't fear what you're about to suffer. There will be some, but you're going to have a different experience. The devil is about to cast some of you into prison. Did we get locked down with everybody else? We did. And that's what happens with an epidemic. That's what happens with the pestilence. It might imprison an entire population for a time. And when we come out of that, we find out who will continue to seek Adonai, who just turn to him temporarily because their opportunities for sensuality were cut off, and who simply became more unclean, more lawless, more beastly while they were imprisoned. And I think we see all of that. We can look back even at YouTube. If you look at the Bible studies and how it was off the charts, how many people were watching Bible studies during COVID. But then when they went back to work, it started to fall off. His word meant less and less. Why? Because the systems sucked them right back in. The organizations sucked them right back in. And maybe at some point they'll realize this is the way the leopard works. At first it entices. Then it intimidates and coerces. And in the end, it kills you. You can't afford to forget Adonai in the wilderness because he won't forget you. He remembers when you serve him. And he remembers when you go out the front door with this mentality of eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. Let me just indulge every sensuality here. See, the imprisonment was not a bad thing. You know how many people came to Adonai during COVID? Because finally it kind of cut some things off. It cut off some distractions where they could be alone with him and they could draw near to him. That period of imprisonment, they're actually brought forth some life, and they're going to receive the crown of life because they sought him. They saw it as wow, there's a reason for this. Others, they just came out the other end worse than they went in. Worse than they went in. They're more vicious. They're more short-tempered. They're more addicted. They're more drugged. They're more full of alcohol. They're more full of rage. They're more sexually immoral. They're all of that. I don't know if they'll leave this on YouTube. I doubt it. If they do, we'll upload it somewhere else and let you know on the newsletter where we did that. But it's time to be plain. Because like I said, in this mixed bag of animals, some of them aren't. Some of them are righteous from among the nations, and we need to give them a hand out, but we can't help them out if we're not teaching the truth, and his word is truth. So imprisonment, that's a type of pestilence. When we imprison ourselves, and that's what Babylon does. It imprisons the unbridled soul in its own desire. So it's a place, it's a plague where emotions and thoughts can hold us captive. It can freeze us in helplessness. When we become too anxious, we get frozen because we feel helpless. We don't know what to do. But remember, it is written. It is written. It is written. For the rebellious, for those who don't see these, I call it depression, but there's definitely, we go through periods of introspection that maybe we think it's depression, but it's there for a reason. He lets us go through those tough prisons of evaluation. Self-evaluation is good. We should be evaluating ourselves, because we might find in that he let us go into that dark place because there's one specific thing he wants us to do for him. And if we will do that one specific thing for him, it might be the very key that opens the gate to our prison. For the rebellion, that plague of dark emotions hangs around. And when we deal with depression, it's not easy because it involves both the soul and the body. Remember, soul, appetite, emotion, desire, and intellect. And the soul, this animal-like part of us, it says, you knew me in my mother's womb, when you formed me in the lower parts of the earth. Even as your body was being knit together, so was your soul being knit into it. And so your soul and your body are in cahoots, if you want to use that old expression. They are in cahoots, and they're not always working for you. The soul is a good thing. This animal-like thing inside of us, it keeps us alive, and that's why it's in there. It allows us to experience things like joy and pleasure, when they are godly joys and pleasures. And so, because your body is so knit together with the soul, it can be very difficult to break out of a depression. And again, you have to keep seeking, Father, what do you want from me here? What do you want from me here? And sometimes it'll seem like you can't find the answer anywhere. You don't quit asking, Father, what is the one thing you need me to do right now? Father, what is the one thing you need me to do right now? And when he shows you what that one thing is, do it. It might be as simple as lifting a little finger. Remember, Yeshua would say, do you want to be healed? Do you want to be? Sometimes he's asking, do you want to be healed? Okay, I'm going to turn the lights out on you so you'll listen to me, so you can hear my voice. But the lights may have to be out for a while until we settle down and we're willing to receive what he has to tell us in that darkness and in that prison. And our soul and our body are kind of going to be screaming at us, get us out of here, get us out of here. This doesn't feel good. Give me something to numb this feeling. Or because he kind of suspends the sensuality of the soul, sometimes we just kind of get numb. And that's when it might say, give me something to make me feel something. I don't like this numbness. We could go in one of two directions. That's, mine with drugs is people are either trying to numb themselves or hype themselves up to the max in sensuality. So whichever way it goes, remember the answer is not in self-medication. The answer is in saying, Father, what is it you're trying to do in me to prepare me? I know you want me to cross over with ever-increasing faith, ever-increasing perfection in your word. What is it you're trying to perfect in me? Please show me what it is, and then please give me the faith to do what you're asking. And typically, he doesn't ask you to go move a mountain. Typically, what he'll ask you to do is something probably very simple, something very easy, except it's not easy because it's something you've been avoiding doing for a long time. But if you'll do it, if it's whatever it is, it'll open that floodgate of freedom, and you'll be able to walk out of there. And think of Peter sitting in the jail cell during the days of unleavened bread. James had just had his head cut off, and Peter didn't have any reasonable expectation he was going to walk out of that jail cell. And what happens in the middle of the night? Angel hits him. Don't wait for the angel to hit you, but if the angel hits you, definitely wake up and go. All right. Hopefully he'll just kind of shake you a little bit, say, "You, Sleeping Beauty." The Father needs you to get up, put your clothes on, let's go. And it might be something that simple. Get up, get your clothes on, walk out the front door and say, "Father, and where next? Where are you sending me?" Whatever it is, listen. Because the spirit in you is clean, it's pure, but often it's out-muscled by your soul and your body because they're so used to getting their own way. So don't let Babylon imprison you with sensuality. Don't let it imprison you with your own desires, your own emotions, and your own thoughts, because it will end up freezing you right where you are. He can lead you out of that prison. It's a stage of testing for the righteous. And it says that you're going to be thrown in prison for 10 days. 10 is a specific number. It has a specific meaning. Number one, it's the number of a congregation. It's the minimum number of a congregation, which is called a minyan. And so in Jewish prayer, you need a minyan to have congregational prayer. 10 people a minimum. But during these times of testing, when you feel like you're in the darkness in the prison, prayer will sustain you, especially when there is a plague and a pestilence of fear, which we know will happen. We know that that's the job of the hell bugs, to make people anxious. And so we have to detach ourselves from Babylon and say, you know what? The same things that make Babylon afraid, not the same things that make me afraid. We are not to fear, but we're to pray. And if we feel like it's too strong, like I said, your soul and your body are teaming up on you. You ask other believers to pray with you. You have them lift you up. And then you start eating that word. You know, if you feel like you're in the prison for 10 days, the word is what you need to sustain you. That's the best prison food there is. But don't be one of those that just refuses to suffer through this decision-making stage. Avoid the temptation. Now, if you need medication, I'm not telling you not to take medication. If you know, sometimes we do have physical problems that require medication. I'm talking about improper medication. Don't try to medicate yourself out of that decision improperly. Don't turn to your electronic devices, media, to distract yourself when you should be in prayer. You might be one of those, you instead of kind of medicating yourself down, you like stimulation. Quit partying. You know the parties you shouldn't be going to. You know the gatherings you should not be going to. Don't go. Don't overwork so you don't have to think about it. All of these things distract you from what he's asking you to meditate upon until you hear his voice. 40 days in the wilderness for Yeshua, 40 years for the Israelites. I hope you don't have to stay there for 40 years. I hope it's just 10 days. There's all sorts of other methods that we use to mute the mourning that he takes us through. Not as really a plague, but as a test. Will you listen to me? And when you go through those 10-day periods of mourning, where he's trying to get your attention, what are you mourning? Your soul, part of your soul just died because part of your self-will just died. But some people don't want to go through that mourning. They don't want to sacrifice their will to the Father because that's widowhood. Mourning is for widows. It's for people who have lost someone. You're going to feel like you lost part of you. The great thing is that person needed to get lost. That part of you needed to get lost. And so when we have no desire to change the things or the thing that this plague is highlighting in our life, we're saying, I'm going to be the queen. Good to be the queen because I don't have to change, because I don't have to suffer through the pain of change. When people break addictions, it hurts. There's pain. When people make good changes, there's pain. It hurts. And some simply say, I will be the queen or king. I will not suffer. I will not be a widow. I will not mourn. I refuse to give this thing, this unclean thing, to the Father. And it will be difficult. We'll want to distract ourselves with spectacular things which feed our sensuality, or we'll try to check out with numbing our feelings. You know what? And there's even aspects of religion that can feed into this. Religion can fall prey to this, because often you might go to a religious gathering thinking, this is where I'll find peace. And you'll realize they're just trying to cheerlead you to good feelings, but without the spiritual transformation. You'll walk around thinking, oh, that was great praise and worship. Oh, the preacher really made me feel good in that 15-minute sermon. He made you feel. It made you feel. But what was the truth? Did anybody ever tell you you're going to have periods of suffering and mourning and grieving the parts of you that the Father is trying to trim away and prune away? Or they might try to numb you. They might try to, you might have real questions about your spiritual transformation and they'll just mute it. They just shut it down. They just stay on the script, right? When sometimes you're going to have to go off your script. You're going to have to figure out, what is the change you desire in me? And it might be you need to fast. You definitely need to pray. It might mean that you need lots of prayer partners. It might mean that you need to do things for other people, that you need to minister to the orphans and the widows while you go through your orphan widow period. Whatever it takes, that's what we need to be willing to do. Because the merchants of the earth will never stop enticing you until Babylon the Great falls. And that's what's happened. The merchants of the earth have grown rich from our sensuality. And the merchants can offer us products that either accentuate our feelings or numb our feelings, whatever we need in the moment. They will have something to do that job. Doesn't have to be a drug, doesn't have to be alcohol. Some people are addicted to shopping. Some people are addicted to sports. Some people are addicted to gambling. Some people are addicted to trolling. We all have ways of dealing with it. And so, yeah, the pestilence is not a fun plague. But as believers, we need to know the difference. And as we go through these very short, 10 days is not a long time. It's basically a good prayer push. Commit yourself to 10 days of prayer, extra prayer. I know you all pray each day. Maybe commit yourself to extra prayer. Maybe find a group of people where you can pray with one another. Find a prayer minion. Find 10 people. who would like to pray through a 10-day period? And not just pray for themselves for spiritual transformation, but pray for the people you know. Pray for those in authority. Pray for those in those organizations who are really naive as to what's going on. Remember, there's clean things mixed in with the wild things. We can pray that the clean things be sorted out, that they come out, because the sins are piling up to heaven, but they will never penetrate into heaven. We don't want to be in the pile when he starts paying back double. I don't want to be in that pile. That's one pile I definitely don't want to be in. So I didn't realize, I kept looking at the clock thinking, man, are we ever going to get an hour in? And it flipped over and I didn't see it. We're actually 26 minutes over. So, okay, we got 26 extra minutes. Yeah, if you're trying to find the tzila, the Hebrew, search on Hornet in Exodus. Not necessarily in Exodus. You're going to find it in Joshua. The reference was on there last week, wasn't it? I think I used a different PowerPoint. Yeah, but if you'll search under Hornet and then click on your Hebrew and you see tzila, you know you found the hell bug. Yeah, we'll get to the locust, the large army attack, hopefully next week. I spent way too much time on the wild beast today. But I just have to think it's not accidental. Maybe there's one person out there that there was one thing in that they needed to hear. We're in a leopard system. We are in the leopard. Again, Greece went to Rome. They perfected those systems. And now we're in the toes. Rome perfected the systems. And it's still in the mixed iron and clay of the toes, which are all over the earth now. Those systems have literally spread all over the earth. Oh, okay. Yeah, Dana put it in there for me. Thank you. You can probably get a good summary of that in a YouTube video I did probably about a year ago. I think it was called A Concise History of the Beast. It was pretty concise, History of the Beast. I don't know if I took it all the way back to the dragon or not, but it does go all the way back to the crocodile of the Nile, or Pharaoh in Egypt, who was the serpent that passed off his authority to Babylon, the first beast kingdom. But it'll give you like the history of that progression. You cannot get others out of the hopeless despair caused by the hell bug. We'll get into that more next week when we get into the stage where the 5 months of torment. And by that time, there'll be something interesting has happened, which is with Pharaoh, the third hardening of his heart, of his own heart, was a key. And then there's like a transition statement. His heart was hardened. And then everything after that is Adonai hardened his heart. And so through these plagues, people it's just like the Garden of Eden. We all have to make a decision. If they're deciding to stay in hopelessness after they know there's a way out, you need to do some heavy intercession, because if they keep hardening their hearts, there is a transition point where they just will not repent. They simply will not. Now, depression for a believer, again, he's working on us. He's patient with us. And I think just giving them guidelines, helping them understand the process they're going to, if they're willing to talk to you. But if they're not willing to talk to you, there's nothing you can do except pray and intercede that if they won't talk to you, that the right person will be sent into their life. Even King Saul, we see that it was a degenerative process. There was a period where little David could come in and sing to him, soothe him with praise and worship. But because Saul kept making the wrong decisions, he eventually became pretty much the wild beast. He became the predator, the hunter, the murderer. Yeah. But again, prayer, intercession, fast. And that's why I say, there's nothing wrong with fasting and praying for a particular thing. It doesn't have to be a declared fast from Scripture. There are declared fasts in Scripture. But if you see something in your life or somebody that you really care about, you might want to set aside some fast days specifically to pray for that person. Or if it's yourself, pray for yourself. Or have some people who would commit. Maybe you don't have to ask them to fast, but if they would commit, if you know that they're intercessory prayer people, ask if they would agree and say, I'm going to fast for 3 days, or I'm going to go on a partial fast for 7 days, or a partial fast for 21 days, whatever the Spirit's speaking to you, and say, would you agree to pray for me or with me for this number of days? And I know it sounds like, well, when you don't know what to say, you just say pray. No, that says everything. That's everything we can do. And pray very specifically, what is the one thing that has to change? He's somebody in dark, deep depression. He's not going to ask something complex. They're in no shape to do something complex. Typically, he will ask them to do this one thing, take this one step, and then I'll show you the next one. And then I'll show you the next one. But they have to choose. Do you want to be healed? They have to say yes. And then he'll give them the strength, to get down into the water if they need to get down into the water. But when they're in that darkness and that captivity, they're overwhelmed. They cannot hear complex steps. They cannot hear what you just heard today. Maybe they could. I don't know. It depends on how desperate their spirit is. But when somebody is in that deep a depression, you have to deal with them very simply. Just the fundamentals. But that's the frustration. No, we can't make it better. We can't get them out of their depression. And if you can get, like I say, if you can get the devices away from them, if there's any one thing in this world today that introduces repeated anxiety, it's these devices we use. The one we're talking on right now, the phone. Work, it's hard to get away from it. Work, because your work might be on a computer. But there's constant electronic stimulation. And that's the stuff that we know about. There's all sorts of stuff we're taking in our bodies. Like the lice gnats, the stuff that's getting under your skin, and you don't even know when it gets under there. You just know later when it itches or it hurts. All day long, we're getting stuff under our skin because we won't put the thing down. We don't know how to fast electronics other than the necessary. And I would say if you can, If it's possible, and you may not be able to go on a total fast, but if you can go on a 21-day media fast, don't watch the news for 21 days. Don't watch those crazy videos people send you for 21 days. Don't send those crazy videos forever. No, but you know what I mean in terms of limiting the electronic assault. You're building up anxiety and you don't even know why. You're feeling anxious, you don't even know why. That's why. Get rid of it. Leave it in the car. Go put it in the garage for 3 days. Go put it in the garage for 7 days. Unless you've got children who are out there and you know, need supervision. But even most of the stuff that we're calling supervision, you could figure out a way. Is there somebody there? If it's something you have to monitor, could they take it for 3 days? Or you didn't have to open email for 3 days or 7 days or 21 days? You pick the fast day numbers. If you replace all that electronic junk with staying in the Word, prayer, or just meditating, find that quiet place. You won't believe the difference. Yeah, we're definitely they're trying to stop reproduction, basically. That's worldwide. They're cutting off the root and the fruit, and they don't even know why they're doing that. They don't know the bugs already under their skin, right? Yeah, that's I don't know how many of you go camping, but just talking about this electronic stuff. We even find ways to take our electronics camping. But just imagine you lived 300 years ago. The only lights at night were going to be candles, maybe a kerosene lamp, torch. And so when the sun started going down, whenever it went down, so would you. You would start gearing down the soul, because it's when sunlight penetrates into your body, all these levers and wires and switches and knobs, they turn. You don't know what's happening, but it's happening. So darkness and light do have an effect on your body. And now we are artificially keeping ourselves awake with television, phones, watches. We turn on all the lights we need to. And of course, our kids are wired. Literally. They're wired up all the time because we leave the wires hot. And it's not a bad idea to, especially in the summertime, this time of year, when the heat, as the sun drops, the heat drops. It's not a bad idea to just take a walk in the garden in the cool of the evening. If you don't have a garden, I don't know how to help you. I don't know, but especially if you live in an apartment, urban area, it might be hard to find a quiet spot to just watch that sun start to sink and feel that light drain out of the sky. I don't know how to describe it to you, but definitely you feel inside. It's like inside you start to gear down too, because this is the creation. This is the way he created us. He didn't create us to stay up half the night partying, binge watching movies half the night. And so when we do that, we're monkeying with the knobs and switches and levers. And so the closer you can get to the creation in that aspect, I think the more we'll find that it's not really a plague. It's just stuff we let get under our skin and we didn't realize we were absorbing it. We did, or maybe we kind of suspected, but we didn't know how much till we turned it off. So if you can get your kids out camping a week or two in the summertime, or take them to the country, rent a cabin, something where you're not tempted to keep the lights on till 10 o'clock, something where it's just easier to go to the rhythm of the creation. You might find that it's not a hell bug. It's just the plague of the time, and we're not born knowing those things. This kind of technology is, for my generation, brand new. I remember pagers, and some of y'all don't even know what those are. I remember pagers. I remember when you were perfectly fine making it through your day without your phone and thinking, oh my goodness, my child will die if they can't text me, and I will die if they can't text me. We did just fine, not being able to call our moms all day long, or them calling us. It might have been mom's calling. I don't know. My mom would probably wear me out texting if there had been texting in her generation. Where are you? Who are you with? Do I know them? I would definitely get the third. Yeah, I wouldn't have wanted texting. Yeah, she knew exactly how long it took to get from point A to point B. And if I took too long, I had to account for it. Yeah, I remember those brick phones. Remember bag phones. I remember I've lived to see the progression, but it used to be that you could go just as far with your phone as the cord. And yeah, I remember when you would run to answer the phone instead of just looking to see who it was if you wanted to answer the phone. But those are just practical things. Those are just practical things. It's just kind of like managing your healthcare. I think managing electronics has to become part of this generation's healthcare. Okay, guys, like I said, I talked way longer than I intended. It's because I got the sound turned down. I didn't understand when it actually flipped over. But thank you guys for joining in. And I had thought maybe we would make it through the end, but apparently we won't. So maybe next week we'll finish out the plagues, and then we can circle back to that other section of the footsteps and the greater Exodus. Okay. All right. I'll see some of you in class, Bezrat Hashem, Monday or Tuesday. And I pray that you just have a wonderful week, and that you get a few rays of sunshine, and you get some rest from the electronics. Get out there and find a fruit tree or a tomato plant and pick it and eat it while the sunshine's still in it. It really does heal. I think we were created for such things. So if you get a chance, see if you can. All right. Oh, also, one last thing before I sign off and spread the word. The Shavuot 2024 Israel tour is up. You can register. You can see the itinerary, and you can register. If you go to blossomingrose.org, just where it says tours, pull it down, and you'll see Shavuot 2024. It'll be Robin Cowherd, Cheryl will be our coordinator. And so she's put the itinerary together, so you can take a gander at the itinerary. Mushrooms. Where did that come from? The good kind, I'm sure. But you can take a look at the itinerary, and if you'd like to go ahead and sign up, you can click on the little thing down there and you can get registered for Shavuot 2024. And yes, it will be hotter than blazes, but there's just a tiny window of time when you can see the wheat harvest in Israel, when it's golden. I mean, you can always see it when it's green, but to see it when it's golden, it's just like a sea of gold. And so we'd love to take you to see that. Those pictures are once in a lifetime, unless you live there and go there a lot. It's something to see. And because it's in June, you might actually be able to take some kiddos if they're in public school and you have a hard time taking them to Israel during Sukkot or Passover. Shavuot might be the key next year. So, and it'd be a great graduation present, come to think of it, wouldn't it? Grandma, grandpa, aunts, uncles. Be a great graduation present. Yeah, kosher mushrooms. Okay. Okay. All right. Love you guys. B'ezrat Hashem. We'll be back next week. Bye-bye.